Welcome everyone to another episode of the Project Podcast presented by Project Insulin. Today we have Elizabeth from T1 International. I'm very excited to be talking with you. Actually, maybe not from T1 International by the time this launches, but we'll get there. But Elizabeth, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, who you are, and let's get into it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Elizabeth Pfiester. I also go by Liz. I'm the founder and executive director of T1 International. I have lived with type 1 diabetes since I was 4 years old, and I grew up in the United States. I grew up and at times struggled to afford the cost of my diabetes. I was lucky to be able to come and study here in the UK. Met my husband, who also has type 1 diabetes, which is a whole other story. And that brought me to live pretty permanently here in the UK and set up the organization, which I know we'll also get into. And yeah, have been here working and living ever since. I have a dog named Joey. I like to read and do some art and some hobbies like that on the side, and try not to let diabetes totally consume every part of my life, which is a challenge at times.
Which I was going to ask, given it's hard just having diabetes, but then also like you dedicated all this time now into starting your own organization. So I'm sure that is an incredibly hard balance. I wasn't going to start here, but since we're already here, do you want to touch on it a little bit more?
Yeah. Just in terms of like diabetes and it being a big part of my life. I do think it is a challenge. And I know we'll probably speak about the transition a little bit later, but it is diabetes, as I know many people listening know, is a really 24/7 condition. You have to be caring about yourself, looking after yourself, thinking about how you feel, what your food intake is, what your insulin intake is, all of those things pretty constantly. And living with that condition is taxing enough. And then I feel really lucky and privileged that I get to work in something that I'm so passionate about and that there's just such a huge need for. I can talk about the foundations of the organization a little bit later, but generally really lucky and grateful to also get to work every day with people who like in and out understand what I am going through and what a high blood sugar feels like, what a low blood sugar feels like. And equally, my husband, my partner for over a decade now, who lives with type 1 diabetes as well. He was diagnosed later in life. I was diagnosed as a child. And so all those things are generally things that I'm super grateful, but it is, diabetes burnout is a real thing that no matter what, if you live with diabetes, you may face that. But when you're all consumed by all things diabetes, I think it is very real and certainly has been a challenge and can actually sometimes thinking about it too much can make you almost want to reject it a little or can just make it more of a challenge. Yeah, it's got its ups and downs.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow. And so I didn't know you were born in the US, lived in the US, then moved to the UK. Really, I just filled in your story a little bit, but it makes it sound. Tell me about that.
Yeah, of course. So I came to study. I was lucky to get into the London School of Economics to do a program in international development and humanitarian emergencies, which I always say is a mouthful of a degree. But was able to come and study. And as a student, I didn't know that I was going to be staying here, but as a student, I was able to be on the NHS, which is the National Health Service. For anyone who's studying longer than 6 months, they get to access that healthcare system, which was incredible because while I did bring some supplies and things, I was able to see a doctor, get all of my prescriptions. And part of my story, which I've told in other places, but it really still resonates to this day, is that I went into the pharmacy the first time to pick up my insulin and testing strips and all my supplies. And I didn't have to battle with insurance companies. I didn't have to pay any money out of pocket. I just walked away with my medications. And it was like the most incredible experience and the most quintessential, okay, this is what the NHS is about and why it's so incredible and why it's a gold standard worldwide. And so that experience for me and just knowing that I was able to access that and that everybody in the UK can access these things. It's not a perfect system, but it certainly views health as a human right. And so that made me even more passionate about the later foundations, T1 International. And stayed, studied, met this guy named John. And that's really what kept me living in the UK. Again, didn't know that I would be there permanently, didn't plan it. But looking back, when I decided to set up T1 International, I was not working. I was giving my time and energy for free to to run the organization as a volunteer. And I feel pretty confident I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was living in the United States. I would have had to have had a job that was probably full time so that I could get insurance, so that I could take care of my health. And again, the UK system enabled me. I had my healthcare covered. I could at least give that time to establish the organization.
That's amazing. Really interesting. I started Project Insulin without quit my job. I haven't been on salary. I've been saving, or I had been saving for over a year before I left my job because I knew I was going to do this, and I didn't know how long it would take. But that savings would have like gone away very quickly if I had to think about insulin and other medical expenses. Wow, like very cool that you were able to do that in the UK because of the NHS. And so tell us, we've been teasing at this for the first 10 minutes here, but tell us about T1 International and that beginning point. Like what did you see that you wanted to start this organization?
Yeah, so T1 International, in short, is an advocacy organization led by and for and with people with diabetes all around the world, really to fight for our health rights, particularly access to insulin, but also all the things that people with diabetes need to live a full life. And sadly, 1 out of 2 people who need insulin around the world can't access or afford it, which is just mind blowing, considering that insulin was discovered and injected over 100 years ago, that the cost is still so unaffordable. So that's, yeah, some of the outrage and passion behind the foundations of the organization. We were set up in 2013. Yeah, as I mentioned, just really through my master's degree at LSE and just my own interest, I really started digging in and wanting to learn about what it was like to live with diabetes in other parts of the world. And as I'm spending a lot of time learning about conflict and crises around the world, I'm thinking, what if I was in these situations? I also studied international studies as an undergraduate. So some of those questions were happening at the time. And honestly, I couldn't find a lot of information or personal stories or examples about life with diabetes in the DRC, for example, or in Syria, or wherever it may be, where healthcare systems are struggling for whatever reason. And so part of this was me just doing a lot of research and trying to make connections. And T1 International was just a blog at the beginning. I wanted a place to put all the information because I thought, well, if there's other people like me who are looking for this information, I should collect it and share it with the world. And then it became more and more clear that there was just a real need for a kind of patient-led organization working towards sustainable change. It took a while to get to what should our focus be. And while this was me driving it, again, John was one of the founding trustees, and we had a small group of volunteers and set up our first board of trustees in 2014, and then started to get a lot of input from the community we were working with. And most of this was pretty digitally online led. I was lucky to attend some programs that enabled me to meet people with diabetes around the world and make connections that way, but also then just, again, just online. It's incredible how, how you can connect with people in almost every corner of the world. And so, yeah, really started to build out and make sure that one thing that was always really important from the foundations of the organization is this isn't just what I think is needed, but making sure we're really hearing what is most important and most needed by communities around the world. We do not purport to know what the needs are of people in other places. We work with them and provide tools and resources and support. And so it took time to build out what is our strategy, what do we think is most important. And rather than donating insulin supplies, which is hugely important and life-saving, you need to be alive in order to be able to advocate. But we saw that there was a big gap of any organizations, especially independent, pharma-free, patient-led groups, pushing for long-term change. So really going for policy change, practice change, not just a sort of more quick fix, which is donating insulin supplies, which again is life-saving, of course, but you need insulin and testing strips every day for the rest of your life if you have diabetes. So I'll leave it there for now, but let me know if you have other questions.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine our scope at the beginning was just the US, right? And so like for us, it was a little easier, right? We had a very focused start point. We're going to go make insulin and we're going to distribute it in the US. That has changed over time. There will be a bigger update soon, everybody. We will let you know what's going on. But I can only imagine for you starting as an advocacy group with like worldwide, like immediately with this worldwide interest in advocacy, how did you do it without being overwhelmed, because there's
Mhm.
just, right, like, because every country is different and we're learning about regulatory affairs in each country, and the regulations in each country is different. You can't just do an FDA regulatory and then have that cover around the world. There's EMA in Europe, there's different regulatory groups in India and Africa, just all over the place. When it came to consolidating all this information, what was the process of, like, how did you choose what to do first?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think in the early days, it was, as I say, just like a lot of information gathering and wanting to ensure that people's voices were heard. We started with a global map, which is still on our website today, where you can click a country on the map and learn about life with diabetes there. And that again was in part was like we just want to get any and all information we can from anyone anywhere around the world, which it is daunting. And we talk about this a lot with our small staff team is we can't be everything to
Mhm.
everyone, but we also are the only and importantly a global organization for people with diabetes. So we also need to think with a global mindset as much as possible. And it is hard because, as you say, the challenges, the political situations are very different from country to country. And what we also remind each other as a team is we don't exist to be experts in the politics of Pakistan or Uganda. We have partners and we have advocates in those countries who can help us understand. And it's our job to listen and learn. But the kind of advocacy tools and training and support that we provide can be applied. Of course, you have to be conscious about the way you do it. There are dangerous situations where protesting, or while that works in the United States currently, or it's safe, some might say, in the United States currently, again, that's debatable, but in other countries around the world, it's incredibly unsafe to protest. So we do try to be really thoughtful, and we recognize that one of the most important things that I feel that we do, you might ask my team members and they might say something different, but for me it is providing that community space. So many people, again, I've spoken about how lucky I am to be surrounded by diabetes. There are people who advocate with us who don't know anybody else with diabetes. They've never met anyone in their country with diabetes. So being able to have a network of people all around the world who care about insulin access and affordability and care about improving the lives of people with diabetes can be life changing for someone and can give them that motivation to find others, to build a community, to make change. So I think in some ways that is the baseline of what we provide, while we're also doing some of these bigger things, both on the grassroots level and the high level to make change. But that's a really important thing that I just think is universal in terms of, again, situations are different, but stigma is common anywhere you go in the world. People judge people with diabetes, the mental health stress and burdens of living with diabetes. There are definitely some universal things that we can come together as a community about and support each other with. And I think that's hugely important.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think we've talked about burnout and we've talked about stigma in every single podcast episode so far, and none of these come. You saw the questions that I come with are not like very focused. It's a bit more broad so that we can just
Yeah,
have a conversation. But for that to come up every single time, it just reiterates your point on like
exactly.
that global experience, that shared experience. This is a bit of a tangent here, but I think that you're the first person I could relate with this on. So John is on your trustee board of trustees, which I assume is very similar to our board of directors. Um, what was that like at the beginning? Because for us, Gabriella, my partner, is on our board of directors. And at the very beginning, it was very weird because I would come home or whatever. I stayed home. But she would come home and be like, "How was your day?" And it'd be like, "Here's all the things happening with Project Insulin. But you are now like, you're both my partner and on the board." And I've never gotten to talk about this. So I'm curious what your experience has been like.
Yeah. So John is not anymore on the board, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, in the early days, I do think, again, personal opinion here, but in some ways, I think that you need to have that mutual agreement between you and your partner that founding something is hugely time consuming. It's a lot of effort. I tried to think really hard before I was like, I'm going in and I'm doing this because, yeah, initially I was like, where else can I offer my skills and expertise and time to
Mhm.
things that exist? But there was a very clear hole and a gap that it was like, this has to happen. And so having buy in within a household or whatever your situation is, I think is really important because it's just such a commitment and such an intense experience. And I think, yeah, in the early days was just super grateful to have that and to have Sean really in deep of knowing what was going on. I think as we grew and as time went by, there can be points of tension, being totally honest. As the person who was I think the most invested, that's not to say that he wasn't invested. Yeah, there can be tensions. It's a common thing, I think. You may have experienced this or be aware, but in boards of trustees, there's differing levels of commitment and availability. It's volunteers, folks who can give something in one way, but can't give something in another way, or can be really helpful in meetings, and then between meetings are unable to commit much more. So it took a while for us to figure out what is the best role that he could play, and eventually he decided that being on the board was not for the best, and still is a huge support system to me, and definitely hears downloads regularly of things. But yeah, I would say for the time it made a whole lot of sense, and it makes sense to me with the situation that you're in. But and I know it's different for each organization and individuals as well.
Yeah, I agree. Having my partner be supportive of this, because at the very beginning, again, similar but different, because I don't have diabetes, so it was like I was coming into this space and with no real. It was more of a, I just kept trying to do it until someone told me I couldn't, and then no one said I couldn't, so I've just kept going. But having my partner share her experiences, and that's where I learned about anything and all things diabetes to start. Obviously, as time went on, I interviewed people, I met with them, learned about their experiences, and it grew. But yeah, at the very beginning, she was such an anchor on just knowledge and diabetes that I didn't have. And now she's such an anchor in like supporting. I'm not a strong writer. I'm more of a talker, which is why we do a podcast. And she's much more a stronger writer, like helps with some of the strategy things. But we do. I'll be like, hey, I need your board hat on. Do you have the space to be a board member right now? And that's how we've gotten around, and just being clear about what space I'm coming in. Like, I could just need to complain about a meeting that I didn't enjoy, and like, that's not. I don't need your board meeting. I don't need your board hat on. I just need you to be my partner, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but for her that was hard too, because I would complain about meetings and she didn't know what reaction, like who she needed to be at the time. We've made very clear with what hat are you wearing, and do you have the space to wear that hat right now?
Yeah, that's really helpful, and we've continued to explore that with some of our volunteers who hold different roles as well, as that kind of thinking of which are you having your strategic organizational hat on if you're also a board member, or are you having your chapter leader hat on?
What were some of the struggles from the early days of T1 International, and how did those evolve? Obviously, there's still hardships and it's still hard, but it's different now. So what was it like at the beginning versus what is it like now to be struggling, to be dealing with something?
Oh, yeah, a couple of different things come to mind. Yeah. T1 International was started, we didn't have like seed funding or big donors. It was, as I think I've said, outreach and hope was the kind of combination of things that really got us going. So I think in the very early stages, I didn't necessarily envision us having paid staff. It was something that I thought if someday we can get to that, it would be incredible. And over time, we did secure some grant funding and different things, but I think in the early days, just not having a lot of credibility, for lack of a better word. We were a small, scrappy little grassroots organization in many ways. I still think of us that way, although we're much more known in the diabetes space, I think. But that can be hard, because at times felt a little like shouting into the void or something. These are such huge, important issues that no one seems to be focusing on. Reaching out to diabetes publications, trying to get them to just even write something about insulin affordability issues in the States or around the world, and getting a lot of no's. And that can just be really hard. And you have to have a lot of determination and grit, I think, to keep going. I think those are probably the biggest things. And I think what has continued on until today, one of the most important things to me, especially as I'm moving towards stepping away as executive director, is having sustainability for the organization. We obviously don't want to need to exist. We would rather that these problems were not problems in the world, and we're trying to solve some massive problems on a global scale. So I hope, and it was always my intention, to set this thing up as something that, if we had a strong vision and strategy and strong values, that it can live on and keep doing the work, no matter who's at the helm, no matter who's involved. And yeah, that's another thing that feels really important to me. And that has been a struggle. We don't accept funding from the pharmaceutical industry. We very intentionally have set that as a value, as a core piece of who we are, because 99.9% of organizations out there, not only diabetes organizations, but a lot of health organizations, get money from the pharmaceutical industry or the device industry. And that can, whether consciously or subconsciously, affect how they don't speak out. And that limits us in terms of, we're really careful about our funding. And I know a lot of organizations are struggling just to get by, because charities and nonprofits, especially if there's an economic crunch, are the first things to get cut in terms of what people can or can't support. I just think that, I know that's a challenge for so many organizations, and whether you're a young organization or you've been around for more than 10 years like we have, that is a continual struggle and a challenge.
Yeah, both of those resonate. The credibility at the beginning, and then also funding at all times. We haven't reached the situation where there is a funder who is interested in us, who might not necessarily have the best interests of the organization in mind, thankfully. But I've had many conversations about, what if someone comes in and is, here's a bajillion dollars, but you're going to have to change the direction. And I was like, and yeah, I hope we never get there, but regardless, the mission is very clear for us as well. So if it doesn't fit the mission, then we're not taking it as well. But yeah, when talking about credibility, and I've been looking for a way to sneak this story in, because I don't know if you know how important this was to us, but we launched our website January of 2022, and I don't know how you found us, but within 3 weeks, you found the website and put your name on our email list. And I cried. I was like, whoa, someone like outside of our bubble knows who we are, and not just someone outside of the bubble, but someone big outside of the bubble. To me, to have T1 International, the executive director of T1 International, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And I shared it with my partner, and she was like, oh my gosh, do you know how big they are? Perspective. And I was like, I know they're a big diabetes nonprofit. And she's like, they're the advocacy group. So we were both very excited, and she's very excited that I'm on this call. She texted me right before. Good luck.
Oh, that's so great to hear. That warms my heart. Please tell her I said hey and chat sometime. But yeah, we still feel the big orgs, the big names are still the go-to, and they do some important work. And we're just we want people to know that we're here. So to hear that is validating. And yeah, and I know we've heard from our folks around the world, some folks we work with do take support from pharma and are taking donations from pharma to keep people alive, which I totally understand. And they have said, without T1 International, we wouldn't have a voice to speak for us, since we can't speak. And yeah, just hearing things like that and knowing that just our existence is really crucial means the world to me. So thanks for sharing that.
So a couple questions before we wrap up. First one is, what would you tell someone who is trying to start a diabetes startup? And I've met a few of our interns are trying to make a CGM that's also a pump. A couple of them want to do some other tech stuff, but you want to start a diabetes startup. And obviously it's a little different with an advocacy group, but what would your advice be to someone trying to come into the space?
Great question. I think, again, two big things come to mind is, if you're looking to make a product, whether it be insulin, whether it be a device, you are up against big power and big money. And so be aware of that. It sounds like you've done a lot of thinking of the what ifs and the challenges that may come. These companies have a lot of money, have a lot of legal power. And so just be really thoughtful and aware of that, and have plans in place for in case, because if you end up producing something great or make a good product, chances are they will try to buy you out or will threaten you in some way. And so be ready for that. I think the other piece is, try to know the space. It's hard to know every individual and organization. And to the point of your story, it's probably came up in our Google alerts or something. I don't know, but it's, oh, new insulin project in the space. We try to stay informed and know who's here so that we can make strong connections so that nobody's duplicating efforts, because I do firmly believe we're stronger together. And yeah, I know that there's always going to be some overlap between organizations and projects, but the more you do your research before you start your project, the more you can understand what is our niche and what is our gap that we're trying to fill, and how is it different from what others are doing, so that we can complement and support each other in the best way possible and uplift each other towards the much bigger goal, which is better lives for people with diabetes on the whole.
Yeah. No, one of the biggest fears early on for us was like, what if like we spend 5 years, and at the time we thought it would cost $50 million to make a generic. It's less, thankfully. But what if we spent $50 million in 5 years trying to make this generic insulin, and then out of nowhere, someone else like already comes to market like a year or 2 years before us, and like we're like, now what? Thankfully, we've learned about the industry, learned about supply chain issues and all these other things, and know that there is space for more than one drug development organization. But yeah, like it's nerve-wracking because we're asking for a lot of money, and it could be used for other things in the diabetes space. Yeah, so that is definitely a really great piece of advice, and maybe I should get Google Alerts, like a really smart way to get that going, to keep tabs on people or on what's going on in the future.
Yeah.
And my last question for you is, what's next?
Yeah. So I am planning to leave T1 International by the end of the year as founder and ED. I will become just the founder. We will, on September 14th, for those who are interested in coming to this event that we're holding, it's a virtual event. Anyone can attend and hear from people about the last 10, 11 years and what T1 International has meant to them. And we'll be handing it over. I will be handing the reins over to the new executive director, which I'm really excited about. And so that is the marker of the transition. I will be around after that, kind of doing some wrap up pieces. It's been a long time. I want to make sure that the handover and the transition is clear and clean and that nothing gets left behind. Yeah. In maybe around November time, it's not as super clear is when I'll be really stepped away from the organization. But that September event is what I'm looking at as the marker. And so my hope, maybe it's the diabetes since a young age, I don't know, but I'm the kind of person that really likes to have a plan. And I also have been doing this for a decade and not always prioritizing my health as the number one. So my plan is to not have a plan, which is very scary. I'm taking some time. Luckily, we've decided I'll try to at least take a couple of months, which I think will be hard because there's always more work to be done. But I also know that if I burn out, and that's part of why I created this sort of long-term transition plan. It's been about 3 years in the making of trying to prepare so that the organization is set up to succeed and live on. And I do feel really good about the place that it's in. And so, yeah, trying to take a true break of spending some time. I have some young nephews, and dig into my hobbies and things like that, and then figure out what is next. It's hard to imagine not contributing to the global health space or the diabetes space in some way, but trying to be open about what the future holds, and will always be T1 International's like biggest number one fan. May join the board in the future, but there's some things to figure out, and I'm looking forward to taking some space and time to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Taking some time to yourself will be amazing, and I hope we all get updates on what the hobbies are and what you do with them. But so sorry, you now brought up another point. This may not work with flow, but we're doing it anyway. You talked about vacations and you talked about burnout. As a founder, I have an awfully hard time like taking a day or 2 days, or one time I took 10 days off and was like scratching at the door trying to get back in and work more. How have you found, it sounds like it hasn't been perfect, but how have you been able to set those boundaries for yourself and make sure that you take the time you need, so that, because this isn't a sprint, right? This is a marathon, and it will always be a marathon. But how do you, I guess, stick into marathons, stay hydrated, make sure you have the food? What do you do to feed your soul and your mind and your body so that you are physically and mentally and emotionally able to keep going and continue doing this for 10 full years, 11 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it was a lot harder in the early days. Our living situation was different. I was working, my office was in the living room, which is never ideal. So that made shutting off a lot harder. then eventually transition to where we are now. And this, just having a separate workspace, I think is really important for me, of when I'm done for the day, really trying to actually be done for the day. Again, yeah, that doesn't work perfectly every day, but it really helps. That is something that has really helped over time. Another challenge I faced is I'm based in the UK, working with folks all over the world, is you also want to be flexible and available when people are available. My team in the US is just getting going on their days when I'm winding up my day. So those things are hard. And having a team and having other people that actually believe and want to support that work-life balance is really helpful for sort of accountability purposes and mutual buy-in on okay, really having this hard cutoff point. And yeah, making plans with friends. I think I mentioned my dog, who I love to spend time with and is a great excuse. I also have gotten really into cooking this year, just like cooking different meals, which helps me really transition from the end of my workday into my non-work day. So things like that I've found are just really helpful. And I think in the early days as well, it was really important to me that we were responsive and communicative. That's like a value that I held really close. And so I have always been a bit of a fast responder when I can, when I'm not in meetings or when I'm not having time off. And I think that's really important. And especially while you're establishing yourself, you want to be a good communicator. I also think that goes the other way when you're really setting clear boundaries of, you don't have to get back to someone today unless it is truly urgent. And practices like that I've tried over time. Love the scheduling email function that will schedule something a couple days later, so that it's not the more you respond, the more responses you get. There's these cycles that you can get into. So there's little tools like that I have found helpful in some ways as well.
Yeah, email scheduler has been like a godsend. Yeah. Thank you, Liz, for joining us today. Thank you for being so open about your experiences. And yeah, again, for me, this is really cool because we want to be able to proudly say that we made it 10 years, 11 years, and that people lean on us into the future. So this was great for me. I'm sure this was great for our audience. If you're interested in learning more about T1 International, it's t1international.org. And yeah, September 14th. Hopefully we'll get this out before then. But if not, I will be there, and I'm sure it was a great event.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And as I said, thanks for all you're doing and working on as well.